What's up, everyone? Welcome. We are live right now on Cannabis, and if you're joining us on YouTube or Spotify or out there in the sphere, thank you so much for joining us. We have a great episode for you today. We're going to be talking all about cannabis science and terpenes and cannabinoids. It's going to be super interesting. We have Dr. Riley Kirk here today, but before we get too far into the episode, we do need to give some folks some shout outs. First off, shout out to the Cannabis community. It's our members only community. It supports the channel, helps us keep going, helps JR make it out to things like the Emerald Cup and to different farms and stuff like that. And we upload all those all of those videos to our YouTube channel. So if you want to support that, please check out Cannabis in the mobile app store of your choice. Download the app, join us, and you can use the code BUZZ for your first month free. We really appreciate your support. And also we send out seeds on a pretty recurring basis to pretty much everyone that signs up. So be a part of it. We'd love to see you over there. Also, shout out to lostcoastplanttherapy.com. We appreciate Dirk and his company. They make a fantastic spray that you can spray in your plants, both in veg and in flower if you needed to, and it can combat all sorts of things. We've also have really great videos on our channel with Dirk where we explain when and how to use Lost Coast Plant Therapy. So thank you to them for their support. And then last shout out from me before I throw it to JR is going to go to sacred3mushrooms.com. If you want to explore growing fungi at home, you can grow edible mushrooms or all sorts of things. Check out sacred3mushrooms.com. They have a grow kit. It's like the size of a shoebox for about $80, I think, these days. And you can use the code CANNABUZZ for a discount. And it has everything you need and then some up on his website. He's got instruction videos and all sorts of things. So thank you to Tanazi over at sacred3mushrooms.com. And then JR, I'll give it to you for the last couple shout outs.
Thanks, Q. We'll go ahead and do our Tiki announcements. He's still doing the buy one, get one free at tikicuts.com. He's got a lot of amazing varieties there. So jumping on that opportunity to get one free, I wouldn't miss out on that at tikicuts.com. And then Raw Genetics, they have that Ozakuri, which is a Blueberry Z by Ziggy Guy. And that's at rawgenetics.io. And they've got a lot of new Ziggy Guy crosses coming out. So make sure to check them out at rawgenetics.io.
Awesome. Well, let's get into the episode. Today we have Dr. Riley Kirk. She's a cannabis research scientist and educator with a Ph.D. in pharmaceutical sciences, specializing in natural product chemistry. She studies the traditional and contemporary uses of hundreds of medicinal plants. She's been in all sorts of content. I was just saying before the show started, I recognize her. I think I've seen her out there in the sphere, and you probably have too. So I'm really excited to learn today from Dr. Riley Kirk. Welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro, JR and Q. I'm really excited to be on and talk about cannabis chemistry.
Yeah, we're really excited to have, someone who's really been deep in the chemistry side of things and who is really passionately trying to understand how those keys lock into the chemistries of our own. And so we always like to start our guests out on their first appearance by asking them, how did you fall in love with the plant, and how has the plant gotten you where you are today?
Oh, I love this question. So I have been consistently using cannabis since I was about 14 years old. I have a very hyperactive brain, and that, yes, in the sense of like ADHD, but also I've had seizures in my life. And since using cannabis, I haven't had seizures. So for me, it's a preventative medicine. It's a mood stabilizer. It's a quality of life metric. It's just part of me at this point. And for a long time, I was just a stoner who also liked science. And it wasn't until late into grad school that I was like, oh, cannabis could be a career. I don't need to be a stoner and study other things. Like I can be a stoner and study this amazing plant that I fell in love with. So really during grad school, I realized how much we were lacking education on cannabis, cannabis chemistry, and the endocannabinoid system. And I really wanted to help fill that gap so consumers could feel more confident talking about this plant, talking to their family, talking to their physician, and even talking to themselves about finding the right variety or, the right consumption method, and just empowering people with this plant to find their medicine and to use it in the best way possible.
That's really cool. I think that's a noble cause because, I mean, we're just now in the infancy of understanding what the plant has to offer in all of its expressions. And so, one of the things that we're kind of in the midst of right now is a terpene war. Consumers are getting educated about flavors and terpenes. And so, can you kind of we'll just start this section off by telling us what exactly are terpenes?
Yeah, sure. So terpenes are best known as the smelly molecules in cannabis. We know now that there are other smelly non-terpene molecules, but when we think of smelling one variety versus another, what you're really smelling when you smell that difference is you're smelling a different terpene profile. Cannabis is not the only plant that produces terpenes. Every plant produces terpenes. They're essential to plant life, but the way that terpenes are technically described is a hydrocarbon. So it's made of just hydrogens and just carbons, and it's built from these very specific building blocks called isoprene units. So that's the actual definition of a terpene, but in the cannabis world, typically we're thinking of unique smells and also unique activity in the body, because they're not just smells. Those smelly molecules, when we smell them or when we smoke them or vape them or however we take it in, those smelly molecules are also binding to receptors in our body, and they're changing the way that that certain strain is making us feel. So it adds to a lot of this entourage effect or a lot of this nuance that we feel with one specific strain versus another.
Right. I think when you first start, at least for me, when I first started exploring cannabis, once you become more of a sophisticated consumer, I guess you kind of start to associate smells and maybe or tastes and effects and things like that. The next question I wanted to ask you was basically, I've noticed when you look at a lot of strains, you'll see maybe a few terpenes listed if you look it up online, or maybe if you're lucky, it's on the packaging. Is there a certain number of terpenes on average that a strain typically has in it that you'll see? I guess that's maybe the most dominant terpenes, or I'd just love to kind of learn more what people can typically expect from a cannabis cultivar.
That's a really good question. And I think there's kind of two parts of that. One is your terpene percentage, which a lot of people say, that doesn't matter. I think it does matter a little bit. I think everything matters, though. As a scientist, absolutely everything matters. So a typical terpene percentage, you'd probably see around 2 to 4% in flower. But as far as what terpenes we often see, you'll often see the dominant 3 terpenes. Caryophyllene and myrcene are definitely the most common terpenes that you're going to see in cannabis products. But you'll also find, if you're looking at a certificate of analysis, you might see that some of them are in the 1.5%. But then after that, you'll see this list and it starts to taper down. And you'll see 0.05, 0.01. So there's a lot of terpenes present, but it's really about, the ratio, because some of those molecules might be stronger even though they're present in smaller amounts. So it's really hard to kind of gauge what that really means, because some of them are more bioactive than others. Some of them are actually more smelly than others. So your nose can actually detect them at lower amounts. So it's kind of a complicated question, but I would say there's usually about 3-ish, 2 to 3 dominant terpenes. And then there's going to be maybe 8 to 10 that are also present, but in significantly lower amounts.
I've kind of found, and this is something I've talked about before, is that the cannabis plant itself has the ability to mimic more terpenes, I think, in nature than any other plant on earth. And has there ever been any kind of scientific quantifying of the potential combinations or the amount of terpenes that could be expressed in a flower?
Dang, I don't know about that. Not to my knowledge, but I will also say cannabis has been bred and manipulated a lot more than your average plant that's producing terpenes, and specifically for smell, like for that terpene profile. So I would agree that cannabis definitely has like a larger suite of possible molecular combinations, but I'm not a mathematician, so I'm not sure I could put out a number there.
It's crazy because I hear like, oh, 400 different and 600. And I
Oh
just
my
think
gosh. I
you
think
can
it's way
imagine
higher
it's
than that.
much, way higher than that. I
Yeah,
would
like
agree with
orders of
that.
magnitude higher than that.
I'm gonna kind of jump in with a question, JR. I was looking through yours, but a question came to mind for me where I guess I was curious when I follow like a fair amount of farmers on Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever, and you'll see them talking about the strains that they're growing, and sometimes they're really stoked when they get those reports back about like various terpenes or cannabinoids that are in there that might make them a little bit different than others, I guess. Are there, off the top of your head, are there specific, now that we're talking about terpenes, are there specific terpenes that are kind of the rarer or seem to have become maybe some of the more sought after terpenes that people are just really pumped to see on their reports?
I think as the cannabis industry grows and more people are growing and there's more strains present, I think anything unique, we want to highlight that. I think ossamine, specifically for like sativa type varieties, is starting to get a lot more attention because ossamine and terpinolene together kind of create this really unique, uplifting, locked in effect. And that is something that you often do see in sativas, but ossamine, it's something that we don't see in a ton of varieties, but when we do see it, we typically can smell it and we can feel the effects. It's I think a lot of growers that I follow are really stoked about ossamine. Let me think of other ones. I mean, humulene too, that gives that kind of hoppy IPA smell. I think a lot of people, I think consumers really like that because it's a little bit floral and really tickles the nose nicely. So I think those two are up there, but I think there's a million different terpenes
sure
that people are
everyone has their
after.
tastes,
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the ones I found in the Tiki Rain was ferrocene, which is
Mm.
the green apple, kind of the skin of an apple. And I always thought that when is it going to be that we start getting some of these perfume and cologne offerings that are mimicking these expressions that we're finding? I mean, I just think that's like a gold mine waiting to happen.
Yeah, like an actual like a scent for
Yeah.
people to wear. This is so funny you bring this up. So I think it was 2 years ago at MJ BizCon, the world's largest cannabis conference. I was at one of these booths and they were selling terpenes, and I'm like, "Yo, that's so cool!" So I grabbed some and I just sprayed it all over me, and I just smelled like a terp bomb. And then, and then I'm walking back to my room, which was in Resorts World, the hotel at the time, and somebody stopped me and they're like, "Ma'am, I don't mean to be rude, but what scent are you wearing? It's the most beautiful smell in the world." And I'm like, "It's weed." And they were like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I just sprayed terps all over myself." So people love that smell. As humans, we gravitate towards it, but especially people who don't really know weed, like they don't really think it smells like weed. It just smells like this beautiful floral, unique scent. So I agree. It's a huge open market.
Yeah, I think when we had iPoppy and when we interviewed him most recently, he was talking about potentially making like a white thorn rose perfume eventually or something like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
that would slap. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So are there terpenes that are psychoactive that have that sort of experience or effect on someone?
Yeah. Well, technically, psychoactive is like a molecule that's active in your brain in some way, right? So, yes, by that definition, there are terpenes that are psychoactive. We think of like beta caryophyllene. It can bind to the CB2 receptor. That's part of its medicinal value. It can help with inflammation. But I think terps on their own, you might feel something, but I don't think you're going to feel that same high, or you're not going to feel like a psychedelic effect. It's more of like, the cannabinoids are given your base experience, and your terpenes are kind of like providing the nuance, the surrounding, the environment of that high. They're tweaking the high just a little bit to make it, more uplifting or more sedating or, more calming, more stimulating, whatever it is. I think they're providing more of those like
Nuance.
balanced effects, but not necessarily like giving you a high.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
I mean, but
Well,
we haven't tested every terpene in a high enough amount
Right.
to know that. So from the ratios and levels that it's present in the plant and how we are currently consuming it, we would say no right now. But that's not to say that that might change in the future when we start to isolate more terps and start to study them in that way and at higher concentrations. I mean, people are putting terps into some products at like 15, 20%, which to me is too high. But I'm someone who lives by this rule of like a natural ratio. So I trust the plant a lot, like the most. I trust the cannabis plant to produce molecules in a ratio that's medicinal and safe for us. I think sometimes in our industry, we think more is better, always, more. So we add more terpenes and we increase the concentrations of things in ways that the plant would not produce things. And I think that's where we can sometimes touch on these adverse effects if people feel like their throat hurts or their nose is tingling too much when they hit a vape cart.
Yeah.
We don't need that many terpenes in everything. The plant knows what it's doing and it's not going to produce anything in an egregious amount. And I think our industry can learn from that too and say, okay, we can always take more of something, but we don't need to produce the product to have such a high amount that's what people think of as like a quality product. I think we should stick closer to what the plant is making and has been used for hundreds, thousands of years by people, and that's been shown to be safe and effective, and we should trust the plant. Our whole industry should trust the plant because nature is the best organic chemist in the world, and we should remember that and learn from that.
my kind of thoughts on that too is like, as we're like back in the day, I would see those guys on Hash Church just dabbing raw terpenes, right? And so now we're starting to get into this realm of, oh, hey, these are cannabis derived terpenes and these are non-cannabis derived terpenes. From a molecular chemistry standpoint, is there really any difference?
This is a good question. I mean, from a strictly molecular, if we were only looking at molecules, there's not a big difference. But if we were to actually analyze those products, there would be a difference because they're not made in the same way. They're not cleaned up in the same way. They do have other things, even in low amounts, whether that's, other terpenes that maybe aren't found in cannabis. So I would say they are different. They're often used kind of interchangeably, especially as isolated terpenes. Like we add in a shitload of linalool because it's kind of easy to get from lavender or other sources. But yeah, I mean, I think doing terpene extractions from the plant and getting that natural ratio of the terpenes that specific variety made, I gravitate towards that type of added terpenes. If you remove it from the plant, you do your processing and then you put it back in, that's cool. But if you're removing it from the plant, putting it somewhere else, and then grabbing other plant-derived terpenes and adding it into that product, I don't think that product has the same medicinal value as it would have if you were to put the same terpenes back in.
And I would say as like a consumer experience, the stuff with the food terpenes or whatever they are, non-cannabis derived terpenes, always tastes terrible. Like I remember the first time I experienced this, I was at a smoking lounge in San Francisco, and there was like a demo going on, and the guy handed me a pre-roll that had some sort of grape terpene in it, and it smelled like I was smoking those like markers that you had as a kid that's supposed to smell like grape or whatever it is. That's what it tasted like, and it was like,
or like a Swisher Sweet, like
it was
yarf.
Yeah, I
Ew.
just don't understand why people would choose that experience. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and back to like falsely, not falsely, but like putting in egregious amounts of terpenes. Like we know that some terpenes do degrade into carcinogens, to compounds that are potentially not good for you. Now, in naturally occurring in the plant, if that's only at 0.5% and you're really not taking in a lot, that's going to be okay over time. Likely, like your body can, deal with that. But if you're just dabbing straight terps, like you're putting quite a bit of that carcinogen into your body. And I'm always someone who's going to say, like, if it feels good to you and it doesn't hurt and you're not getting adverse effects, then that's fine. But I would assume that over time, if you're dabbing straight terps, and especially really hot, like you got to watch your temperature if you're dabbing straight terps, if you're doing it at a high temperature, that eventually is not going to be good for you. And you don't really have any of the other medicinal molecules in the plant to balance out that potential harm.
We almost had a cat interrupt the show. We usually have a dog interrupt the show, but I just saw a cat pop in.
That was
pretty
cute.
funny.
I'm a big
Dude.
cat person.
He's driving me nuts. He's a ragdoll Maine Coon, and he's about 5 months old, but he's giant. And
I have
like,
ragdolls. I'm obsessed. That's so cute.
oh, he's the best. Like, I literally, and then their name, it fits them so well because I just throw them over my shoulder.
Throw
and
them
pack
over the
'em
shoulder.
around and,
Wear them like a scarf. They're so fun.
Yes.
Well,
So-
JR's got his favorite question right here.
Yes, dun 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 dun. And I've been waiting to get someone like you on the hot seat for this one because I've asked breeders, I've asked growers, I've asked everyone what, from a chemistry standpoint, makes a cultivar express itself in a way that it tastes exactly like it smells, because that's not always the case.
Okay. What makes it
Coming with the
taste-
hot ones today.
Yeah.
Coming with the hot ones.
Because where this has come up is like, you know, some of our favorite strains are those where it has a great smell experience right before you consume it. And then you consume it and you're like, holy shit, this tastes like it smells. And it's just a full on, it's the full experience basically.
It's a really good question. It really is. Because I think as cannabis consumers, we've all experienced it. It has an amazing nose. You smell it and you're like, I can't wait to smoke that. And then you smoke it and you're like, oh, I mean, there's nothing there. You know, so I think it's a few things. First, you got to mention the dry and cure. Because if you don't have a good dry and cure, you still might have some nose on it, but the smokability is going to be lost. You're going to lose a lot of that experience. And, you know, even water, the water present, bound or unbound in that product, is going to play a role in how much flavor can come through. But I would also say, as far as terp profiles, this is just a theory. You know, monoterpenes versus heavier terpenes like sesquiterpenes. We did a little research project years ago called Roaches for Research. And we wanted to know what was present in the roach versus the rest of the joint. And what we found is at the end of the joint, you have mostly sesquiterpenes left, and your monoterpenes are leaving like immediately. And a lot of the degradation is seen in those monoterpenes as well. So one theory would be if you have more sesquiterpenes present, think of things like caryophyllene, humulene, bisbolol. These have very unique smells. Like bisbolol smells like chamomile. It smells like honey. It smells sweet. Humulene's going to smell like that IPA, like that sweet floral. You know, if you have more of those heavier terps, I think they hold better through the smoke, and they're going to remain their integrity through the smoke better. And it's actually going to enter your body and enter, you know, your flavor receptors more than those monoterps that essentially the second you light it up, they're just going, like a lot of them are just immediately leaving, right? So I think if you have more of these heavier terps, they're able to, you know, make their way to your body, and you can feel that effect of the smell better and link those two experiences better.
That's so cool. As a layman, how could I know if something's a heavier terpene or not? I mean, I'm going to be going up on Wikipedia and looking this stuff up, I'm sure, but is there a way to know if something is heavier or not?
I mean, I would just
say that, I guess.
I would just know your top sesquiterpenes, like, as I mentioned, you know, humulene, bisbolol, caryophyllene. Those are going to be your most abundant, heavier terps, whereas your lighter terps are like myrcene, pinene. They're literally smaller molecules compared to these other heavier molecules. And actually, if you just Google roaches for research, you will see the poster that I'm talking about from that research.
That's awesome. Thank you.
That is cool. That's very cool. So while we're kind of on the terpene topic, and we'll kind of wrap this one up, and you were talking about some of those, you know, super volatile and some of those very, you know, fleeting type terpenes. And I'm seeing dry sift kind of coming up next. It's going to be a big wave of the next way people consume. Can you kind of talk about some of those terpenes that are getting lost in the wash?
So this is not something I've done research on, but I'm happy to talk about what I know about the process. When we're thinking about like washing in general, if water is touching anything and we're talking about washing in that way, anything that is not a strict hydrocarbon has the chance of being lost. So let me break that down a little more. So I mentioned the definition of a terpene is a molecule made of just carbons and hydrogens. But there's also terpenoids that are present in the plant, and there's a lot of terpenoids. And what that means is it contains typically an oxygen, so something else other than a carbon and a hydrogen. But as we add in those oxygens and we add in these other types of atoms and that have different polarity, now they can be extracted in water easier. Now they're not going to be like oil and vinegar and absolutely be repulsive. Now you're going to have a little bit of mixing between the two because now that oxygen is attracting some of those hydrogens in the water. It's going to help it break apart better, and you're going to lose some of those. So I think it really depends on what that terp profile is and how many of those terpenoids are present, how many oxygen molecules are present in that terpene fraction. And that can kind of help you make an assumption if you are losing some of those terpenes into the water. But if you're just looking at like straight hydrocarbon terpenes interacting with water, you really shouldn't be losing a lot, except for obviously if your product's sitting around a lot, you know, if you're not careful with temperature of your water, of your environment, you're always going to lose terpenes. If you smell your cannabis, you're smelling lost terpenes, you know, like always. That's what you're smelling. If it's in the air, that's that product.
Right.
Okay. I know I said I was moving on, but it made me think of one more question. This is the biggest bro science I've ever tried to debunk myself is, do carbon filters rob your terpenes in your grow room?
You know what? I don't know. I was recently at a conference and I asked people who design these filters, I'm like, show me some data. Please show me some data. Because, you know, we all want to know. And it's the same thing actually with carbon filters that people use with their pieces. You know, they put it on top of their bongs or whatever. And they're like, it's better for your lungs. And I'm like, okay, how do we know that that's not just capturing a bunch of cannabinoids and terpenes and other things? Like, has anybody ever extracted them? And I asked that person at the last conference too, who I'm not going to drop the product name, but you know, he gave me one. He's like, you got to try this. And I'm like, you got to show me data if you want me to try something. Like, I'm not, I love the way I currently consume. And if you're trying to get me to change that with a filtration device, you need to prove to me that that is selectively capturing these negative molecules and not the medicinal molecules. You know, we don't know if it could be just capturing only a couple cannabinoids and that's robbing yourself of that medicine. So I don't know why nobody's sharing the data on these things, but I think until they share the data, yeah, I mean, why would you trust them until they share some information?
Yeah.
Word.
This is already shaping up to be one of our best, most interesting episodes. So thank you so much for joining us today. This has been really cool. Our next section is going to be talking about cannabinoids. So to kind of set the table for folks, what are cannabinoids? Just give us kind of a...
Sure. Yeah. So cannabinoids are, when I mentioned terpenes, I said that they were defined based on the building block that makes them up, right? Cannabinoids are a little different. They're mainly defined based on activity in the body. So if a molecule can bind to and act on a cannabinoid receptor in our body, then it is defined as a cannabinoid. So the cannabinoid we talked about the most is THC, but we know there's also CBD. There's also cannabinoids in other plants in nature. When we think about like, I think of like wild indigo, I think of rhododendron species, even truffle fungi, they are producing endocannabinoids that are in our own bodies as well. So they're defined based on activity, and they were named after the cannabis plant. So I don't know if you saw my video a while ago, but I said, you know, I used to say cannabinoid because I learned that in academia where people didn't really touch the plant. You know, people are like endocannabinoid system, cannabinoids. And I'm like, that's weird because we know that these molecules are literally named after the plant. We discovered that the cannabis plant got people high, and then we said, yo, how does it do that? Then we figured out the molecules, named them cannabinoids, and then we discovered the receptors in our body and named them the cannabinoid receptors. But we have almost all academics call them cannabinoids in the endocannabinoid system. And I just think that's a little disrespectful for the plant. So I, put some content out there and I said, I'm only saying cannabinoid from now on because everything I do is for the plant. It's not for an academic to publish another paper. Like that's not my mantra. I think we need to really start highlighting the role of the plant so that we can use that, as advocacy when we're talking about it, and make sure that we always have access to this plant, no matter where this industry goes. If it goes synthetic for some things, if it goes pharmaceutical, let's remember it started with this plant, and we all should have access to this plant, to growing it, to smoking it, to sharing it. All of us should have access to the plant.
Yeah, we're huge fans of access to nature, and we have decriminalized nature come on the show at least once or twice a year.
Cool.
Somebody to come on. And I personally, and I've said this a million times, is I don't feel like any other human, government, religious agency of any kind, any other human can block my access to nature, what nature's providing me to heal my body, mind, and spirit. And so if it grows in a field or in a forest, that's on me. That's my relationship with nature, and no one else should be able to kind of block that.
I agree, because we are nature. Sorry, just saying, like, we are natural beings, and that just shows how far removed we really are from nature. When our government tries to take away nature from us, and we just say, okay, I think you guys know what's best for us.
Yeah, that's scary.
That is scary.
And so moving forward, we kind of talked about how, the kind of the dominant conversations are THC and CBD and how they modulate each other and act, synergistically with each other to either increase or whatever the high is. But what are some of the other cannabinoids out there that are kind of coming to the forefront that have benefits like CBG, stomach, CBN, sleep, stuff like that?
Oh yeah, I think CBG is incredibly promising for daytime use. A lot of people, they love THC, but they just can't use it during the day because they just don't feel like their brain is functioning in the right way. But CBG is it's shown some like stimulant properties, not like Adderall, not that crazy of a stimulant, but it's still able to keep you awake, keep you focused, but still help with things like, inflammation and anxiety. I've actually published a paper on CBG and anxiety, and a lot of people benefit from it and need that daytime use, whether it's just CBG alone or adding in CBD with your CBG. CBD can help with that anxiety too. But also if you have inflammation, if you have a chronic illness and you're taking CBD, adding in different cannabinoids like CBG during the day or CBN at night. And I think what's interesting about CBN is cannabinol, CBN, is it acts really similar to THC, but for people who are really sensitive to THC and they can't really find a dose that they're comfortable with, I find a lot of people feel more comfortable with CBN. It has less of a come up for lack of better words. You don't have that like I feel high all of a sudden. It's just like a much more gentle approach. It lasts longer. We have data, THC can help you fall asleep, but CBN can help you stay asleep. So especially, one, understanding these different cannabinoids, and then two, understanding different methods of administration or consumption and saying, okay, well, maybe I'll take a little hit of THC to help me get to sleep, but then I'll take a CBN edible and that's going to be much longer lasting. And that's going to help me stay asleep. If I'm somebody who gets up at like 3 a.m. every day and I have trouble staying asleep. I also think CBC, cannabichromene, one of my favorite new cannabinoids coming out. I mean, it's not coming out. It's not like a new cannabinoid just dropped, but, it's definitely getting more popular. I think like Wana Brands is introducing a new edible with CBC. And we have some really promising data that CBC acts kind of similar as CBD as far as reducing inflammation and has synergistic effects with THC. So specifically for chronic pain patients, that could be a really useful combination to allow you to reduce your THC consumption if you're not somebody who wants a lot of THC, but you still need that pain relief. Adding in that CBC can help you get that increased pain relief with decreased psychoactive effects. I think CBE and CBT are really interesting. So I'm going to struggle saying this. CBE is cannabidiololin. I think. And then CBT is cannabitriol. And I think both these molecules are degradation products. So you'll find them in smoke samples. They're often a degradation product of THC, but both of them are interesting, again, for pain and being less of a psychoactive a molecule. So I think those will be studied more. We're really lacking data on those two. But I think, again, this is something that we're trying to study in this upcoming year is some of these other cannabinoids that are really up and coming, but we're just lacking a lot of human data, a lot of biochemical data, a lot of safety dosing data. So that's something that we want to help add to the literature on too.
Well, something I've kind of been pondering over the years, because I think I've had like 26 surgical procedures in my life. And I've asked surgeons, is it possible to get through surgery and post-surgery without using opioids? And their comment was always, no, it's impossible. And I find it hard to believe that the entire pharmacopoeia that we depend on is based on a flower. I find it hard to believe that we can't find those same properties in other plants that can allow people, like CBN, for instance. I've heard people say that at high enough concentrations, it can be used to sedate you enough to be in a surgical situation. So can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Oh, man. I can talk about, well, first I'm going to start with some data that I think is really interesting with opioids in general. And it's that cannabis combined with opioids reduces the amount of opioids you need significantly. So that is harm reduction at its finest. That, cannabis is an amazing pain relief. And sometimes even if it can't get you to the threshold you need, combining it and lowering the dose of opioids that are going in your body is going to make it easier to stop using those opioids. It's going to make those opioids less addictive. And it's just going to make you have a better time altogether. So wanted to toss that out there. But I will also add, opioids are from the poppy plant, Papaver somniferum, right? It's the poppy plant. We first identified morphine and codeine from this plant, and then we isolated them, we changed them, we made them very, very potent, and then we gave them to a lot of people. And they do help a lot of people. They've saved millions of lives. But I think the way that our country treats opioids, kind of what you're talking about, is insane. Just kind of giving them out like candy and saying this is the absolutely only option for pain relief. And we know that's not true. I think we need physicians to understand what research has been done on cannabis and other medicinal plants and understand that they do have amazing pain relieving properties. And it is really safe to take cannabis at relatively high levels. And it's not safe to take a lot of medications at really high levels. But with cannabis, nobody's ever died from cannabis use alone. We can take a shitload of THC and we can be sedated, we can be knocked out, and we're still going to wake up the next day and we're still going to be ourselves the next day. And, understanding that type of data for physicians, I think, is going to really change the game. But physicians honestly have I shouldn't say dealt with. They hold a lot of the stigma still because a lot of physicians are, 60, 70 years old. Yeah. They're older. They're reefer madness people, right? Yeah. And they don't trust cannabis because it hasn't been presented to them in a way that is serious and is medicinal. And for people like us, that's our preferred option. They just aren't educated enough to make that decision for our health. So I think until our healthcare professionals become more educated on cannabis and the endocannabinoid system, it's going to continue to be pushing opioids as the only option because that's what they learned in medical school as the only option.
I had a comment that I will kind of back into a question, but earlier you were talking about all these great cannabinoids, that and all these different effects and impacts they have on people or can have on people. And I was thinking about, as a consumer, how hard it is to find stuff like that. There's a big dispensary near me that has some of these products, but not many of them do. I was thinking about how a lot of our audience is growers, and a lot of the time we're talking to cannabis breeders. And I guess I just would put a call out to those breeders to please get tests done and put this information out there somewhere. Like most of the time when you're buying seeds or strains of it, any kind, even clones. They pretty much don't put any information online, and there's reasons for that typically because they don't want to get flagged by their credit card processor or something like that.
Right, it's fair.
Yeah, but like somewhere on the internet, put your cannabinoids so that someone can know, like, because just as some, when I learn from you, like, hey, CBG could be really helpful to me as someone who struggles with ADD and anxiety. So I want to check out, CBD and CBG, but getting access to that as a grower could be tricky because it's just so hard to find that information. But backing into the question now, I guess, are you seeing that it's typically only large companies that are providing products that have these more like exotic cannabinoids? Because I just feel like most brands are not dipping into this stuff. It's maybe a large company or a the dispensary that has these products is a vertically integrated dispensary, so they have access to all this sort of stuff and they're trying to figure out what to do with all their extra product. But yeah, I was curious what your thoughts are, what you've noticed.
That's a really good question. I would say the larger companies do have the bandwidth to get more creative and test out markets, and that's great. But I would say a lot of the craft growers actually have some of the most unique profiles out there because they've been experimenting for a long time. And, I always think of like THCV as an example of this. It's present in a lot of Durbans and it's in a lot of varieties in general, but people realize, similar to how CBD can help with anxiety, THCV can help with anxiety as well because it acts kind of in the opposite way as THC. And a lot of people who don't want to get the munchies, people have been like pheno hunting or looking for strains to help with munchies for a long time. And then they came across THCV varieties and said, wow, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So a lot of those THCV varieties really came from craft cultivators figuring it out on their own. And I think that eventually reaches the big companies, and then they can just like snap their fingers and say, create gummies, do the big thing. And then they can make it huge. Whereas, the little guys struggle to get that information out there. So I think it's more like the craft people are doing the hard work and the experimentation over time. And then the big companies are often the ones benefiting it from it the most.
Capitalizing on it, yeah.
But I will also say, as people out there who make their own products, I make my own products from me, my friends, my family. If you do grow and you do extract your own products and you are looking, maybe you don't have a CBG variety or you don't have a THC variety or THCV variety, you can oftentimes buy isolate, buy pure CBG. And if you're making something like a tincture, you can take your full plant extract in tincture form. I'm calling it a tincture. It's really an oil typically, but anyway. And then you can add in CBG isolate so that now you have that profile that you're looking for. Now it has CBG present. So even if you're not cultivating a variety like with the exact profile you want, you can use isolated cannabinoids to really lock into that specific effect. I always recommend future compounds if you're looking for specific.
That's my guy.
Compounds.
Dustin's my guy. And
Kyle, got to give Kyle a shout out too. I love
Kyle too. Yeah, Kyle. I make my own rub. And
that looks awesome.
I use cannabis infused coconut oil, but I also add Dejao, which is a Shaolin Iron Fist anti-inflammatory vascular healing tincture that they've used for thousands of years for their monks when they're out in battle and stuff. And so I had all of that, but the one component I was missing was the high levels of CBD. And so I hit up Future Compounds and I ordered my CBD isolate, did a little bit of math thanks to ChatGPT, and now I can put 400 milligrams of CBD in every 4-ounce container. And so like you said, you can use those isolated cannabinoids to bump whatever you're doing or enhance or add to whatever you're doing to kind of give you a fuller effect that you're looking for. And with the way that the Farm Bill has been written, I believe a lot of those isolates are going to be more available as time goes, and I hope that only expands.
Yeah, and definitely like we're recommending future compounds, but you can buy them anywhere. Just make sure, just like with you're buying a cannabis product, look at that COA. You want a pure compound if you are buying an isolated compound. And I think you mentioned CBD, and I think this is a really, really good example because almost everyone who's taking CBD is taking like 15 to 20 milligrams of CBD a day. Cool. All the research that's been done on CBD shows you need about 200 to 600 milligrams to get the medicinal benefits of CBD. So if you are making a tincture, even if you do have a hemp flower that you're extracting for that full profile, I still add in CBD because a lot of people actually, I got a comment on my podcast that said, because I had Kyle from Future Compounds on my podcast, and we were talking about this as well. And she came back to me and said, I've been taking CBD for years, and I never had any benefits from it. After listening to you guys, I increased my dose to 200 milligrams, and my inflammatory skin condition disappeared. So a lot of people are just taking the wrong dose of CBD. And if we increase our dose, which I will say, this is not medical advice, but it is safe to take pretty large amounts of CBD. I mean, if we look at Epidiolex, which is FDA approved drug, which is straight up CBD, people are taking like a gram a day, So I'm not recommending everyone out there to take a gram a day, but just so you know, most of the research shows, especially for something like anxiety, you need to be closer to 200 milligrams rather than 20 milligrams to get those medicinal benefits.
And that's going to lead us into the next question. And something I always advocate for is for people to take their trim or even their cuttings and use that to make RSO. The edible form of cannabis is different. And that leads me to my next question. Can you kind of explain to people what the enzymes are doing in your liver when you do ingest versus when you inhale?
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to note, too, that in our research, we found that up to 16% of people cannot feel edibles at all. They're just not processing them correctly, so they don't feel it in their head, and they're likely not getting all of the medicinal benefits from that product because they're not metabolizing it correctly. So it's nothing on you as a person, but just so you know, if you don't feel edibles, and if it takes you 500 milligrams of THC to feel anything, just stop. Like, your body can't process it. Try a different consumption method. But yeah, so differences. When we inhale, whether we're smoking or vaping, we're essentially breathing in, we're absorbing those cannabinoids through our lungs, and they're immediately going to our brain. It's just like, whoop, right to the brain. Our body doesn't have to process it. It just immediate beeline to the brain. Now, when we eat a gummy or we're chewing on something and we swallow it, now our gut needs to process it. So first we need to break down that edible a little bit. We need to, separate the different components. And then that THC and all the other compounds in that plant are going to go through the liver. The liver contains a bunch of different enzymes. And a lot of these are in this family of enzymes called the cytochrome P450 enzymes. And this is what metabolizes almost every drug that goes into our body. So some people have slightly different types of these metabolizing enzymes. And for some people, they're unable to convert THC into its metabolite, which is called 11-hydroxy-THC. So when we feel the effects of edibles, when we go, oh, the edible just hit, that's 11-hydroxy-THC in your brain. It's not your regular THC that you get from smoking. It's actually a different molecule. It's been slightly changed by your liver enzymes. And then after you feel those effects from the edibles and you start to say, okay, I'm feeling not high again, now your body's converting that 11-hydroxy-THC to a different form that we don't need to get into that, but that's an inactive form. So there's this whole metabolism process happening in your body. We're using the example of THC, but CBD gets changed. A lot of other cannabinoids, terpenes likely get changed, but we have almost no data on how terpenes are metabolized in the body. But, we always say everybody's body's different. Everybody's endocannabinoid system's different. And this is part of it. A lot of people either hate the effects of edibles. I'm one of them. I hate the feeling of edibles. It makes me feel like dead and like I can't move. It's not fun for me.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
I've been there.
Yeah. So, people have that preference partly because their body is metabolizing things differently. And I think the most underrated part of the cannabis experience is how you're consuming it. Because, not just the onset, because when you smoke, you're going to feel it immediately. With edibles, you're going to feel it in like a couple of hours, but also the chemistry is completely different. You're taking in a completely different chemical profile with an edible versus smokable product. When you're smoking, that fire is also changing the chemistry. So you're getting a lot of different chemistry in your body. And when you eat that edible, you're getting all these different metabolites in your body. So you're going to feel slightly different too. So there's a lot of factors that go into different consumption methods and understanding your body. But I will also say, little plug, my book comes out soon, this year, actually, 2025. And I talk about this a lot in the book about different consumption methods. It's called Reefer Wellness, and it is available for pre-order on Amazon right now if you do want to purchase it.
Go get it. Go get it. Well, kind of talking on that whole thing about the way the cannabinoids kind of work inside our bodies. How do you kind of approach people knowing that their experiences may be very different when you're trying to make recommendations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, first, I'm always going to recommend a balanced product to start. So CBD is a new consumer's like best friend, So I'm always going to recommend either finding a variety that has CBD and THC present, or I'm a huge fan of making salads, buying hemp flower, having your THC flower, and mixing them together in different ratios. I always recommend that for new consumers. But if we're talking about consumption method, what I recommend to people most often is dry herb vaping or smoking. I think dry herb vaping for people who are very health conscious, I think it's a really good option. If you're always in your head about like, I'm smoking, it's bad for me, I'm smoking, it's bad for me, dry herb vaping allows you those instantaneous benefits. It allows you to get the flavor of the flower still and have that experience, because I think that's really integral to appreciating cannabis and appreciating this plant, is to understand that flavor and how that flavor affects you and to listen to your nose. But I typically tell people to try, 3 or 4 different terpene profiles. And, this is where it does get a little bit difficult, not using terms like indica sativa hybrid, because you kind of do want to recommend, like an indica and a sativa and a hybrid. And although many companies are labeling products pretty accurately, you just can't trust anyone anywhere in the country to go to any dispensary and pick up these products and, have a consistent experience. So that's why a lot of my education is focused on terpenes. So I can say, hey, if you have an ADHD type brain, try CBG. If you don't want to get really high, try terpinolene dominant varieties if you do want to get a little bit high and really locked in. I think that's the best thing for those hyperactive type brains. If you like those indica, more sedating feelings, talking about where it's going to hit in your nose and how that's going to smell different, but also understanding terpene profiles and looking for that caryophyllene and myrcene and humulene, looking for those other types of terpenes. So cannabis is not simple, and I think this is where a lot of confusion and struggle comes from, because with other medicines, when we're talking about pharmaceuticals, a physician just gives you a bottle and says, yo, take this every morning and you'll be better. You don't have to think about your health ever again. Just don't worry about it. With cannabis, it's like, hey, you need to become an expert on your own body, and you need to become an expert on this amazing plant. And if you're not willing to put in that effort, you might not ever find a product that works for you. And that's a really difficult conversation, because a lot of people, don't have time for that education, and we can still recommend products, but your experience is going to be 1 billion times better if you put in the effort to understand the plant better.
I agree. And I will say that to me, inhaling is an acute type of way, coming from a pain perspective, is an acute way to knock that pain number down. Edibles are a way to really keep that down and maybe get you through the nights that are tough. And then the next thing, like I'd mentioned earlier, is the rub. That dit to jowl with the cannabinoids, the rubs. How is that rub so effective? How is it getting into our bodies and healing joints and bringing down inflammatory that's so deep within us when the rub is on the surface?
Yeah, I love talking about topicals. And this is also something I've published on in the past. And I think it's the most underrated form of cannabis use is topicals. So we talked about these cannabinoid receptors. The CB1, cannabinoid 1 receptor, is the most abundant receptor in your brain, right? But you also have CB1 receptors everywhere that you have a sweat gland, a hair follicle, all over your body. And your skin is your largest organ. So it's not just this dead thing that we carry around. It has tons of receptors. It is alive, and we can, feed it with medicine just like we feed the inside of our body. I think topicals do work the best when you have some medicine inside your body and some medicine on top of your body. But yeah, so step one, you have cannabinoid receptors, so you add the topical, and yeah, it is just at the top of your skin, but you have cascade effects happen. So when that CB1 receptor is activated, that can send a signal lower in your body that can reach deeper. It doesn't just need to be right there. So that's one way it works, but it looks like your product also, you said that's like a full extract, right? So it has terpenes in it as well?
Yeah, it's a full extract. And the other thing is I use emu oil as
Yes.
kind of a carrier.
Yes.
And like, is that similar to like what DMSO would do as a carrier?
Yeah, I haven't studied that specifically, but I would think so. But terpenes in general, we also have data that terpenes present in topicals can actually make your cannabinoids penetrate further in your skin. So just having a THC cream that only has THC, same thing if we were to ingest it, it's going to do something. You're going to get some benefits from that THC. But if we have THC and terpenes, now we're getting an added benefit that those terpenes are helping those cannabinoids reach further in your skin. You're getting more medicinal benefits from it. And especially people who have inflammatory conditions or pain conditions somewhere on their body, it's a great way to get localized relief. Or if you have someone, my grandma was super against cannabis, super, super against cannabis, wouldn't try CBD ever. And I was like, yo, that's cool. Do whatever you're comfortable with. But then she had really bad arthritis and she's like, okay, I need something. And I was like, let's just start you with a topical. And you're not going to feel high. I can give you 100% guarantee you're not going to feel high from this product, but it's likely going to make you feel better. And it did. And she uses it every day and she rubs it on her skin all the time. But something we don't think about topicals a lot is you can also build a tolerance to topicals, just like you can build a tolerance to THC in your brain. Sometimes you do need to take a tea break from topicals or switch up your formulation in a way that maybe, we talked about like CBC or, talking about these other compounds. You may need to switch your formulations once in a while if you're like, man, this topical used to work great for my knee pain, but now it doesn't work anymore. Or now I need, like a huge glob to do anything. Well, you might need to take a little break. And another part of that is with topicals, you do need to apply it pretty regularly. It's not just like a one and done kind of a thing. I always tell people to try to bring their topicals with them if they are in pain, like to add it throughout the day. You can't add enough topical. Like it's okay. You're not going to feel overwhelmed. You're likely not going to have adverse effects. But if you continue to add it and continue to add that, it's going to continue to work, throughout the day.
Yeah, it took me a while to really develop this kind of recipe that I have. And I just want to shout out to anyone out there. If they want to hit me up, I have that recipe available that I share with everyone. And it does do a lot for people who are elderly. I have more older people in my family who swear by it more than the younger people in my family, for sure. I guess
Yeah.
as we get older, we have more aches and pains. You know what I mean?
Definitely. And I think it's really cool you share the recipes because, there's a lot of gatekeeping in this industry. And a lot of my YouTube channel, too, is just sharing home recipes because,
Yeah.
Cannabis products, topicals are like $100 at the dispensary.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
who on earth can afford that regularly? So I've also made a video saying, this is how you make a really easy at home topical. Nobody should be spending $100 on topicals. So
No,
I
and you
love that
should
do
not be
that.
throwing away your trim. You should not be throwing away your
No.
trim or even your fan leaves. You can make great topicals out of those. And, nothing goes to waste. Nothing needs to go to waste. And as a person who's a home grower and trying to get the most out of that plant, that's just one more avenue that you can use to, kind of either side hustle or help your body, either way. And
I
I,
love that.
yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I really want to thank you for that comment about being open source. That's something that we absolutely are adamant about. Gatekeeping is not going to lift up our community, and gatekeeping is not going to help us survive the onslaught that is happening to our community and our industry as we are.
Yes, and we didn't get freedom of speech to talk about the weather. So let's talk about cannabis recipes. Let's talk about, healing ourselves. Let's talk about what works for our brain type. Let's talk about what our grandma reacts well to. This information might just seem like a small little conversation, but it literally changes people's lives, especially people struggling financially and who want to use cannabis but don't really know where to start.
For sure. Well, on that note, please plug your podcast, your YouTube channel, where people can follow you, find your stuff. Where can they learn more?
Sure. Yeah. So I post content on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, pretty much wherever people let me yap. And my username is always Cannabichem. So CANNABICHEM. My podcast is called the BioActive Podcast. I mainly talk about cannabis, but I also talk about other medicinal plants. I have a lot of researchers on. I'll also talk about my own consumption patterns. I have a lot of women on in the industry who talk about their research, their experiences, their grows, whatever it is. So follow along there. I post that on all platforms, including YouTube. If you want to watch along, we're typically smoking and chilling. So, and then our nonprofit, where we do research within the cannabis community, can be found at appliedpharmacognosy.org. That word sucks, but I'll help you out. So it's applied pharmacognosy.org.
Awesome.
That's so great. And it's been so good to have you on. I've been really following you for a while now, and I've been excited to get, someone with the kind of knowledge that you have from not only a plant perspective, but from a chemistry perspective, because I'm very, very interested in that. And I do appreciate your time, and I'd also appreciate your openness. And we would love, love, love to have you back on, because we didn't talk about volatile sulfur compounds, esters. And then the other day I saw you made a post about flavorances.
Yeah, flavorants. And that's actually a lot of the volatile sulfur compounds are under this category of flavorants, which is essentially smelly molecules in cannabis that are not terpenes. So that research is really being led by Abstracts Tech. They're doing a lot of cool research into the sulfur containing molecules and just trying to understand the depth of smell that growers have known forever. And they've always trusted their nose for really hunting these correct strains and these unique varieties, but we never had molecules to put to those smells. So shout out to all the growers who trusted your body and your nose. And it is really cool to finally have some chemical structures behind that. And then the next thing is going to be understanding what the actual activity of those molecules are in our body and how that affects it. But yes, that could be a whole nother rabbit hole conversation. Yeah. But thank you guys for having me on.
I really hope we can have you back on. I really do.
Yeah,
for sure. No, this is fun.
This has been really great. We had, we have our live stream, like I was talking about earlier. You can see the heart emojis popping up right now.
Oh, fun. Heart.
Yeah, from Devil's Leaf and Crazy Pop Mom. They said, loved all this info. This has been a really great episode. Our audience, I would say, is, obviously it's kind of everyone, all sorts of people, but I would say it's largely middle class home growers that are trying to create their own medicine essentially. So this information has been really, really helpful. I'm excited to kind of start this relationship and have you on again someday. But please, if you watch this episode, please check out her channel, her podcast, and follow her on all the different socials. It was super interesting episode. Thank you to our supporters, like I said, in the cannabis community. Thanks to our sponsors, like we mentioned at the top of the show. We've got more episodes to come later this month. But thanks, JR, for putting together this episode. It was a great one.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Awesome. And
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for watching. And as always, everyone, growers love.
Growers love.
Peace.
Peace, love, 420.